Exploration in role-playing games is the first major part, but it's also kind of one of the most ambiguous. So let's talk about that. Hey fellow Game Masters, welcome back to the channel. I'm Richard Quiner, and today we're talking about exploration in role-playing games and how it can help you become a better game master. In order to fully utilize exploration in your role-playing game, you need to understand what exactly it is. In a nutshell, it is defined as the act of traveling in or through a place to learn more about it. Now, in role-playing games, the players do a lot of traveling, unless you decide to have a small one-shot campaign, which that's perfectly fine. But when it comes to a bigger campaign, the players tend to move from one place to another a lot. So the question is, how does traveling through and into a territory to learn more about it come into play in these games? Well, in my games, what I attempt to do, player willing, I try to make it so each place is a little different. So as the players go from one city to the next or one territory to the next, they find something a little different, and at each place they learn a little more about the world that they're living in. As I've described in the How to Start Your Role-Playing Game Adventures, I talked about how the game starts small. It starts with the players in one location getting together and then going on an adventure from there. This assumes that the players are not already world travelers in your game. So assuming you have a bunch of level 1 players, they have a whole wide world to discover that is all inside of your brain. And that is where you get to share and help them explore the world around them. When it comes to exploration and analysis and study of different places and things in the grand world perspective, I like to think of 3 specific things, which are basically the places, the cultures, and the people. When it comes to the places in your world, I want you to think about a couple things before you even start your campaign. How big is the world you're building? Our current Earth here is huge. It's a massive place, and most people on this planet don't see all of it in their lifetime. So that's an average of 80 some years, and people don't see even a fraction of the planet because it's so big. So how big is your world that you're creating? Is it a small world or a small continent that everyone travels in and exists in, or is it a bigger, larger planet-sized world that you're building? When you think about that, that gives you a lot more to play with in terms of what your players can explore and see. In the campaign I am running currently, the players have explored an area about the size of California. That's it, and it took us about a year to go all over this area, and even then, they've spent most of their times in the city. So, picture that is the size. California's a pretty good sized state. It's not the biggest, it's not Texas or Alaska, but it's an alright sized state. In the big picture of the whole world, it's tiny. And I am trying to put that into my players that our world is very large. So things are spaced out, things are big, there's a lot happening all over the world, and my players are in this one little spot on the planet. Next, I want you to consider what are some of the major cities. This is more of a world building and kind of coming up with actual places that people can go. And these can be the locations that your players actually start their adventure, or they can be places that they go to later, but it's good to have some major cities. And we'll talk about building cities a little more in depth in another episode, but it's good to have kind of landmarks. They could be capitals, they could be just big metropolis hubs. They have a lot of different options here of big cities that you can build, or even small towns, just points of interest is what we'll call them. When you're designing these larger cities, I want you to think of different things about each of them that can let them stand apart. Every city is a little bit different. Los Angeles is different than New York, and I mentioned this in the last video. The cities are very different, and you should take the time as a game master to come up with something that kind of differentiates them from one to another. So that way, as your players are playing through and encountering these cities, you have something to describe to give them a sense of what the city looks like, what the place looks like, what everything is, and then they can use that to remember a place. For example, in my game, I use the city of Silvery Moon as an elven city that is essentially grown up from the ground, and I described it as the city walls having grown out of the ground as if they were tree trunks growing in, and a lot of the buildings were similar, which paints a picture of this is a very natural kind of city that's not, too set off from nature itself. Is that what is actually written in the books? Not exactly, but it's my world, I can do what I want. The city of Baramoons, which I mentioned in my recap videos, which you can watch down there, The recap video is the city of Baramoons is a dwarven city based in magic. So it has the dwarven city side of it where it's underground, a lot of stonework, a lot of intricate, architecture and art based in stone, but at the same time there is a magic about it that I tried to portray in the game and explain this. Those are two cities that are very different in my world. That is, one is stone, one is wood. That's a simple way to describe things, and you can use that too. You can come up with a simple way to describe each city, but when you do that, that gives your players a chance to find out more about the world. When a player enters a city, they don't have to know everything about it right away. Let that be part of the exploration, is understanding what the city has to offer to the players, which is the culture side of things, as I talked about. When we look at the world, our current world in general, we have a lot of different places that have a lot of different cultures. Los Angeles is Hollywood. This is the city of movie stars and movies being made and actors. When you go to New York, it's different. It's a little fast-paced. There's some more corporate stuff there. There's Broadway. There's a lot of different things over there that we don't see here in LA. When you go to someplace like Portland, Portland has a whole thing with like keep Portland weird, and a lot of this culture of progressive green earth love. It's a different cultural environment altogether. So think about that as you're building your cities. What is the culture of each city? And I like to break this down even further into what is the overarching, what is the city known for? And if you can say what a city is known for in like 2 words, like LA, city is known for movies, that's great. And if you can have that in your thing, as in my world, Baramoons, the city is known for being a solitary dwarven magic stronghold. Then, as you're describing the look of the town, try to build this culture into the description. This way, as the players see what the town is, they can come up with their own versions of what this culture may or may not be. And here's the cool thing when it comes to this game, since it's a team story building element, if a player decides that a city has a certain culture and they're looking for that, that can play into your story. If an elf is there and they think the city, as you describe it, is more nature-based, even if that's not what you decided in your head earlier, that can work for your story, and that's a good thing. Building onto the design of town becomes the interactions with the people around it, and as the culture, your city will have a social life. You should decide what that is in your big city. Is it a city with a big nightlife, a lot of partying and youngsters going out, or is it a city of more retired folk that tend to go to bed at 4 in the afternoon and wake up at 4 in the morning? What defines your city and its people in the broader sense? This will help you define the culture of your city. Last, but obviously not the least, is the people of your world. And this ties directly into the social interaction aspect of role-playing games, because you need to come up with how these people are. And I like to think of this in exploration terms. How are the people in a broader sense? If you go to a city, do you see a lot of wealth? Do you see a lot of disparity between the rich and the poor? Or are they pretty much all common and all the same kind of people? What defines your city in terms of the actual people that live there? You can show this to your players by discussing how the people dress, describing their clothing and outfits in a little more detail to paint a picture of how this is. If it's a city that is largely populated by the wealthy, you can describe them as wearing finer clothes made of silks and fine gold weave or something. If it's a city with a lot of disparity, meaning a lot of very rich people and very poor people, you can define it by the clothing, as some people may dress this way, but the other side of it is you see people wearing rags and burlap sacks or whatever you can picture when you come up with that with your city. That's one part of the people aspect of the exploration, is describing their status, so to speak, or how the city defines those people. One thing I am working on with my players, I am working on this more, is trying to describe people a little more in detail so my players can draw some conclusions before they start a conversation with them. So that's something you could think about as well. How can you paint a picture for your player so they can decide something about that character before they talk to them? Oftentimes, the players will talk to them, and sometimes things will go off in the wind. Like, they won't worry about the character's name, they won't worry about a lot of different things. But if you can paint a good picture and describe the character, like, for example, a bartender. I have a bartender who, when my players first encountered him, he was very gruff, and then he was quickly insulted by the Dragonborn. And I had described him as kind of a tough gruff, the classic dwarf tough guy thing. I don't know what my players were thinking in their brains, but I like to think that it painted a picture and it gave kind of an attitude of what this person is like. He's a hardworking bartender who just has this place that's underground that he's just trying to make a living. Perhaps. In other things, you can paint the pictures to your characters with your words, of course, and they can draw these conclusions, which, as I mentioned before, when your players draw conclusions about your story or your world, that's not a bad thing. It's something you can use to help flesh out the world and make it a little more full for the players. So embrace that as you're doing all this. So that has been the 3 parts of exploration, as I like to look at them currently in my life as a game master. I am trying always to progress and make new things and come up with new ideas behind game mastering, because I firmly believe there is no perfection in being a game master. It's just a constant slog up a hill. And one day, I will never reach the top. And that's fine, because it's all about learning and growing, and I hope you see it too. As you're watching these videos and getting into the games, you see that there's so much to learn about telling a great story that no one can really master. So, this has been Exploration. Next week, come back, please, and we'll talk about social interaction in your role-playing game and how you can help your players include the social interactions and enjoy it a little more, so they don't just focus on something like combat all the time. Now I'm just rambling. Thank you for watching. I've been Richard Quiner, and we'll see you next time. Hey, thank you for watching. I hope this channel has been helpful to you in starting your Game Master adventure. If you feel inclined, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And as you'll see to the right and the left of the subscribe on this little end page here, there are more videos to watch on this channel. So click around, check it out, and thanks again.